Boy, what a great day. Thank you for being here. Nice crowd today. Great song service day. Thank you. Sam, your word, so I'll try not to mess it up. For a little over a month now, we've been studying Seeing the Unseen. And so I thought, well, what a great perspective for looking at the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I think one of the things that has stood out to me through this study is how often we read about these unseen things, these spiritual things. And I've made these points before. You know, we have in the Bible over 300 passages that refer to angels. Another 100 angels, and good or bad angels, and then almost another 100 passages that refer to evil spirits. And when you realize the number of scriptures that talk about these things and many other passages that are in the same context, I'm just amazed at how much the Bible has about this information, and we're just kind of oblivious to it. We just don't really realize it. And so again, I'm having that experience as I look at the resurrection of Jesus Christ, as I look at the gospel, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and realize that there's a lot going on in that spiritual realm when it comes to the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we're going to look at some things that, we probably look at every Resurrection Sunday, every Easter season, and many other times too from our communion service, but maybe from a perspective that we haven't really paid attention to like we have been lately. And so to begin that, I want to, this is probably the only way I'm like Paul, this bad vision. Kind of a joke from this morning, okay? Thank you, Gilbert, for getting it. The temptation of Jesus. Without it, Jesus is not the perfect sacrifice, okay? Without it, God's plan can't be fulfilled. So let's look at that. I'm in Matthew 4. I'm going to read verses 1 through 11. And one of the things, I want you to listen to those spiritual realm kinds of things, okay? Then Jesus, Matthew 4, beginning at verse 1, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. But he answered, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the Satan wasn't done yet. Going to try attempt number 2 here. Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, again, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Strike 2. One more swing he has here. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said, begone. Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him. This is a passage I've preached I don't know how many times, and how many times have you heard this text from the pulpit over the years? And it's a great text to preach from. And we talk about, the power of God's word. How did Jesus defeat the temptation here? He quoted the word, right? And that's been the foundation to this very study about seeing the unseen. We've learned that spiritual version comes from discernment plus Bible knowledge. And then here's a perfect example of that. We also see the evidence that, is it James? I forget now off the top of my head. Help me out. Where he says, if you resist the devil, he will flee. And we see that here in the third temptation, which is really amazing. But do we ever stop and think about how powerful this text shows us that Satan is? I mean, he's nothing to mess with. He really isn't. And that's one of the things in our study that we learned with too is take this serious. Don't mess with this stuff, okay? Because this is life-threatening kind of stuff. But I also fear that sometimes when we read this passage that we don't appreciate what it says here. Jesus was tempted. This is real. Temptation is real. I want you to think about what that means just from your own perspective. Think about a time when you were tempted. So what's going on? A desire has awakened in you, okay? It might be something that you're very familiar with, or it might be something new to you. Who knows? But in all likelihood, it will be in line with some weaknesses. And we see exactly that here in the story of the temptation of Jesus as well. You know, these are in line with things that are significant to him, that are important to him. Okay? And Satan, as he looks at it, he senses the potential for some frailty with Jesus. And we need to understand when it says that Jesus was tempted, that's exactly what it means. There was a chance he might make the wrong choice. Have you ever thought about that before? I mean, it's not temptation if there's not that chance to make the wrong choice. And that's why I said this text is so important. This event is so important because without it, Jesus isn't the sacrifice that we need him to be. We always talk about the idea that what makes him the perfect sacrifice is that he was sinless. If there was never a chance for him to be sinful, that means nothing. If there was not a chance for him to choose wrong, his sinlessness means nothing. But because he had a choice, because he was tempted, because the opportunity was there for him to fail, and that he didn't, that's what makes him the perfect sacrifice for us. You see, Satan's not only a powerful influence in our lives, but he was in the life of Jesus as well. He was in the life of Jesus as well. So I hope maybe next Sunday when we gather around the communion table again, we can appreciate that his temptation, that his opportunity to fail was just as real as ours is. The only difference is he said no. Sometimes we say yes, somewhere along the line. Because Paul reminds us, for all have sinned. For all have said yes to temptation somewhere along the line. So what I want us to realize is that there is a dark spiritual influence behind the gospel, behind the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ that needed to be overcome. But I want us to also understand that because of that dark spiritual influence, underneath all of these things that were going on that we define as the gospel, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 through 4, Paul makes that very clear. That's what the gospel is, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. This whole event doesn't take place without Satan. Okay? I mean, if you just look at the injustice of the event that led Jesus Christ to the cross, there wasn't a Roman law followed in that. Not one. And do you think the Romans are into just giving up their law and letting mayhem take place? Of course not. Of course not. But you see, when the evil influencer is behind it, it's amazing what can go wrong. It's amazing what can happen. So let's take a look at this. Back to the beginning in Luke chapter 22, verses 1 through 6. It says, "Now the feast of the unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to put him to death, for they feared the people. They feared losing their position of leadership and respect and authority, very self-righteous people." Verse 3, "Then Satan entered into Judas." Do we ever talk about that when we preach this sermon? When we look at this text? And I'm just as guilty. I love to explain, well, the reason that Judas Iscariot did this is because Jesus didn't meet the figure of a king that he had. True statement. Absolutely. Judas, as well as most of the people of this time, had a very different idea about what the Messiah would be and what the Messiah would do. And Jesus did not fulfill that worldly picture of a Messiah. And so it's almost like we excuse Judas, for being so ignorant. And we understand why he did what he did. People, he did what he did because of Satan. Amen. Isn't that what it says? Now, I want to mention this too, because we've studied this in our book, that as Christians, we have some security. We have some security against what Satan can do in our lives. What evil can do in our lives. When we are filled with the Holy Spirit, there isn't room for the ugly. Okay? Unless we open the door. And sometimes through that temptation, we open those doors. Talked about it in class. I've preached it from the pulpit. That idea of giving the devil a foothold, right? And that's what Judas is doing here. He's given the devil a foothold with his doubts, with his opinions. Ooh, there's a dangerous word, opinions. He's tired of what's going on, and it's not meeting his expectations. And so it opens the door for Satan. It's important that you understand this. It's important that you hear this. The reason Satan could do this with Judas is because Judas opened the door for him to be able to do it. How are we opening the door in our lives for Satan to do similar things? And at times that's the fight we all fight, isn't it? So when you think about how that door opened for for Judas, it was misunderstanding. A lack of knowledge of the truth. So the more we can equip ourselves through Bible study with an understanding of God's truth and glean that ability to discern better between right and wrong, the less chances this kind of thing could happen in our own lives. Let's get back to the text. Verse 3. Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, who was a member of the number of the 12. What's this a reference to? The apostles, right? And to me, it's just an incredible reminder that nobody is off limits here. Nobody's off limits here. Not even the apostles. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and the officers how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he consented and sought an opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of a crowd. Don't want to be starting any mobs, right? Any riots. I want to read some more for you. I'm going to be reading from Matthew 26, beginning at verse 36. So grab your sword if you want to read along or listen as I read. Matthew 26, beginning at verse 36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Okay, did you just hear that? Sorrowful and troubled. So if you were struggling before with this idea that Jesus could literally be tempted, and that means that he could have made the choice to do wrong, connect that with this emotion here. Troubled. Sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me, pray with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Father, if it is possible, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came, verse 40, and he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. What a slap in the face. Found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Could you not pray with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation." Watch and pray for strength, that when Satan approaches you in your weaknesses, you can remain firm. How did that work for him? You ever wonder and think about maybe the reason that Peter denied him 3 times is because he fell asleep in Gethsemane? You ever think about that? Because Jesus said exactly to him, watch and pray that you don't fall into temptation. And then when that little girl says, "You're one of them." "Oh man, no, I'm not. No, I'm not." Huh. Peter, maybe you should have took the advice of Jesus and watched and prayed. Verse 41, "Watch and pray that you may not enter into the temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for a second time, he went away and he prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again, and he came and he found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words again. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, "Sleep, sleep and take your rest later. The hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Verse 47. While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer, Judas, had given them a sign saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him. How did Jesus not smack him upside the face? The power of God. Jesus said to him, do you hear this? Friend. And he meant it. That was not a term to casually use like we might. Jesus didn't use words casually. Friend, do what you came to do. Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand. We know it's Peter, and he drew his sword, and he struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send more than 12 legions of angels?" Again, there's one of those spiritual statements, spiritual realm statements that I don't think we really appreciate. And when we sing the song, he could have called 10,000 angels. That's real. And again, it's just a reference to this whole spiritual realm that we've been studying for the past, how many weeks has it been? 10,000. And it's almost like he takes peace in that he still has a choice. He still has a choice. He said no to Satan. That was his choice. And now to say no to God would have been failure. His choice was to say yes. But again, Jesus doesn't speak casually here. Don't you guys get it? And that's what he's saying. He's looking at him and says, you guys know this. You guys know this. You know I have an off-ramp here. But I don't need it. I don't need it. I'm ready for this. I'm ready for this. Angels could have intervened, but they didn't. And I think something interesting to think about this too is that this implies a deliberate restraint of heavenly forces, even though unholy heavenly forces are behind this whole event. Jesus and God are saying, nope, nope, that's not how this is going to play out. That's not how this is going to work. So in Luke 23, 44 and 45, it says, it was now about the 6th hour, noon, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Matthew's account of this is a little different. There's another piece of information in the book of Matthew, and that's Matthew 27, verses 50 through 53. I want to read for you as well. Because Luke kind of, you don't feel God necessarily in Luke, for lack of a better way to describe this. Listen to what Matthew says. And Matthew's the only gospel that records this, which is interesting. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And what do we know that he cried out? My Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? So let's talk about that for a moment. What did we talk about? What did I say in my prayer as we went through communion? As we so often do, we talk about the physical death, right? And there indeed was a physical death. And because we're physical beings, I think we're naturally drawn into that. And when we preach those sermons, you know me, I'll find, some picture on the internet of showing the disgust of that crucifixion, Jesus hanging on the cross. Okay? I even once, long time ago, made a scourge. Okay? And I had a board up in front, and as I'm preaching, I'm whacking that scourge on that board, and the sound that it made was eerie. And it just, I was going for the drama, I was going for the dramatic, I was going for the emotion, and it worked. It worked. We love describing how the back of Jesus looked like a plowed field, just all torn up. And it wasn't the color of dirt, it was the color of blood. I even remember talking about the flies on the cross. Remember me talking about that? Because how can you, us old farm boys, we're out butchering chickens or hogs, and what do we got to fight? The flies are attracted by this disgusting scene. I'm sorry if it's, before your Easter ham that I'm doing that to you. But it's true, right? And so I described that fly flying around the face of Jesus, lapping up the trickling blood and sweat. And you know how that is, and you can't swat it because your hand's nailed to a cross. But as terrible as all that is, his physical death, it's the spiritual death that causes him to call out. As a lamb before his shearer is what? So was Jesus. Until he died spiritually. So what's the difference? Physical death, you stop breathing. Heart stops. Okay? Body's useless now. Spiritual death, and the death we should really fear, is the spiritual death. Because that's the separation from God. You see, as long as I'm in the presence of God, I can go to God and pray for mercy. I can go to God and pray for help. I can go to God and be obedient to the gospel and have my sins washed away. But as soon as I'm separated from God through a spiritual death, I no longer have access to salvation. I no longer have access to love, mercy, and grace. I no longer have access to anything good. Nothing. And that's what caused Jesus to cry out. I mean, think about how long had he been suffering physical? Never said a word. Other than to John to take care of Mom. I thirst. But beyond that, cries of pain? No. Cries of injustice? No. Nothing like that. My God, why have you forsaken me? Again, just like I make the point that the temptation of Jesus was a real experience, so is for him the separation from God. And this idea, the sun's light failed. It's interesting. The Greek word there is literally eclipsed. But most translations don't use that. Phillips is one example that does. So it's kind of interesting. Was this actually an eclipse? It might have been. I don't know how God pulled this off, but that would have been an option. But I think we need to understand that there's a symbolism here that's important. If in fact it's true, Jesus was separated from the Father, separated from all that's good, the perfect color for that is darkness. The perfect color of a world that has no God is darkness. You see, because that's the favorite color of sin. Darkness. That's the favorite color of evil, is darkness. And you say, why would you say that? Because you can hide. You can hide in darkness. It's interesting that at the time of the burial, there is no angelic recordings. There is no supernatural recordings here. The burial itself is by Joseph of Arimathea, a man with resources, a good man, a man with faith. He's described as being bold, but not as an angel. And I'm sure in a lot of ways for this man, he's feeling a sense of responsibility. And there's some laws and rituals, some traditions associated with taking care of the dead. And I truly believe that this was a ministry of his to Jesus, to properly take care of the body. And he does that, risking his own faith, risking his own position in the community to do that. Thank you, Joseph, for your example. But however, guards are posted, and we see that in Matthew 27 as well. They remembered what Jesus said, tear down this body and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. I don't think they completely, well, they didn't understand what he was actually saying, but they thought about it and said, you know what, maybe those disciples will try to do something with the body, make us look like fools. So they ordered that tomb to be guarded in the best way that they knew how, with the best soldiers of the time. And they sealed that stone. And the guard was constant. There was no going in and no coming out, at least for any human. At the resurrection, this is where we see the spiritual beings mostly involved and out in the open. But again, does that have any effect on us? Do we think about that? What's going on in this spiritual realm? So let's look at this. Angels at the tomb there. One or more angels appear at the empty tomb. We see that in Matthew 28. An angel rolls away the stone and speaks to the women. In Luke 24:4, 2 men in dazzling apparel, and we understand these guys to be angels. In John 20:12, Mary sees the 2 angels inside the tomb. And what are these angels all about? Quite simply, they announce that Jesus has risen, okay? Really important that we kind of understand this, right? This is kind of like foundational stuff for Christ's church. So we need to understand what's going on here. They interpret the event for the witnesses. As the witnesses are, they're looking and asking, where is the body? And they explain, well, he's risen, he's not here. They serve as divine messengers confirming the resurrection. And remember, what we've learned is the term angel literally means messengers. And that's exactly what they're doing here. Messengers from God to make sure we understand what's happened. A resurrection. A price paid. An opportunity for us to have a choice about our eternal salvation. The power of God. The resurrection is attributed to divine power. Romans 8:11 says, the Spirit of God raised Jesus from the dead. This reflects the direct involvement of God's spiritual presence. After the resurrection, Jesus, in Matthew 28:18, Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And I think too often we read that and we don't catch it. In heaven. What does that mean? In heaven. What does that mean in this context? What the Jews believed and is supported in scriptures is that there are actually levels of heaven. Anybody know how many? You do. You've read it. Yep, 3. Dave's flashing back here just in case he's wrong. He doesn't want to say it aloud. Good call. But no, you're right, 3. We read about that 3rd level of heaven in the book of Revelation. But this is the understanding of that. And Joe goes to that in the book if you're reading that. But that the first level of heaven is what we see in the sky. Okay? That's the first level of heaven. The second level of heaven, and again, this I can't give you book, chapter, and verse on this that's absolutely conclusive, but it fits. That second level of heaven is where those spiritual battles are going on between good angels and demons, okay? That's where that's going on. And the third level of heaven is where God is. That's where God is, okay? What Jesus is saying here, he said, I got authority over all that too. Okay? It's just not a poetic statement about earth and, where the birds fly. But he's telling, when he says all authority, we're talking about the whole thing, the seen and the unseen. Okay? Pretty significant. And pretty important to realize, too, when, the stuff that we've been studying for the last month, let's be honest, sometimes it's a little scary. Okay? But don't worry. Our Lord and Savior has authority over it all. So the Bible presents a multi-layered spiritual involvement. The demonic influence in the betrayal and opposition, angelic restraint during the arrest and crucifixion, angelic presence at the resurrection, divine power in the raising of Jesus, and the cosmic spiritual conflict underlying this entire event. In fact, like I said, and I believe this wholeheartedly, it doesn't happen without that. It doesn't happen without that. There's good and bad news on this Resurrection Sunday. We'll start with the bad news. No, let's start with the good news. Christ indeed has been raised from the dead. Amen. Christ has indeed been raised from the dead. Amen. Thank you. Christ paid a penalty for us that we couldn't, because he was indeed that perfect sacrifice. Okay? He did something for us that we absolutely needed and couldn't do for ourselves. And our future is secure. The gift is ours to choose. The gift is ours to claim. But here's the bad news. Satan's mad. Satan's mad. Now, he might have always been mad, but I think he's even madder now because he got duped. He got tricked. He's not as smart as he thinks he is. He lost. But the bad news is he hadn't lost his power. He has just as much power and authority in those unholy realms as he has always had. And he wants revenge through you. Satan thought he had it. Satan thought he had it by getting Jesus on the cross. He didn't see the end play. He didn't see Jesus walking out of that tomb. Okay? He misplayed it. And he wants revenge. His focus is now not on Jesus, but solely on us. You see, it's his only way to strike back at God is you. So you have a choice today. You want to be a victim? You want to be a victim? Or do you want to claim the victory that Jesus claimed for us when he walked out of that grave? Why wouldn't you accept the gift of your salvation secured on this resurrection day? Today, if you are needing to claim your gift, won't you come forward and let us help you with that? Let us celebrate with you, or whatever your needs might be. Come, while together we stand and sing this song of encouragement.